Chapter 260, Battle the Frost Dragon. The Frost Dragon's mood shifted in an instant. Dewey apparated to avoid its strike and reappeared on the dragon's back. Avada Kedavra! He cried. A blinding green light slammed into the beast. The Frost Dragon's massive body stiffened and a tortured roar split the air. Damn it, Dewey muttered, then apparated away. Glaurung, an ancient dragon forged by Morgoth in the First Age, possessed a soul of terrible resilience. Even the killing curse had only gravely wounded it, not destroyed it. Enraged by the blow, the dragon lashed out with renewed fury. "Wizard, I will see you dead," it thundered. It sprayed searing cold from its maw, its thousands of meters-long form shaking the earth. Dewey kept apparating, dodging the blasts while leading the dragon farther from Isengard. From the sky, Smaug dove in to help. Though far smaller than Glaurung in bulk, Smaug's ability to fly leveled the field. He could dance through the air and pour dragon fire down onto the enemy. The giant eagle Thorondor, swift and lethal, wheeled among them, dodging cold breath and raking at exposed scales with enormous talons, tearing away chunks of flesh. A three-headed wolf, Cerberus, clamped onto the dragon's tail and shook, its corrosive teeth biting through the scales. The frost dragon howled, furious. With a violent swing of its tail, it sent the wolf flung like a stone into a mountainside, whining and incapacitated. "Cerberus," Dewey called, anxiety flaring across his face. Cold crept into his expression. The whites of his eyes clouded, black mist rising from his body as his form blurred and unmade itself. He became a roiling mass of shadow, an obscurus of living smoke. The mist rushed toward the dragon like a gale, tearing at its body. Tiny black grains ground at Glaurung's scales, exposing the vulnerable hide beneath. Invisible forces shredded the flesh and let out dark blood. But even Dewey and Obscurus could only wound the dragon's surface. Glaurung responded by coating itself in ice. It breathed a wall of cold that froze into armor across its hide, a hard barrier that rebuffed both dragonfire and Dewey's corrosive mist. For a while, the dragon was effectively encased. Every attack first had to crack the ice. The frost dragon also noticed Dewey's tactic, luring it away from Isengard. Its cruel eyes swept the ranks beneath Orthanc, the black savage warriors and the Rohan cavalry, and it sneered. "You care for them so much? I'll freeze this place solid." Before Dewey could answer, the dragon blew a torrent of cold in all directions. Frost raced outward. The ground iced over, breath crystallized in the air. If it continued unchecked, everyone would be frozen alive within 10 minutes. Dai solidified his upper body from the obscurest state and flew to shield the Isengard wall. He summoned Fiendfire, roaring flames that leapt up and shaped themselves into a towering wall around the fortress, halting the spread of the cold. He then became a Fiendfire Balrog, a demon of living fire, cracking a lash of flame at the dragon. The whip smashed at the ice armor, but Glaurung spat back. The dragon's cold snapped the Fiendfire whip solid. Ice met fire in a furious stalemate. Steam and mist shrouded Isengard, then crystallized into swirling snow. Through the confusion, Basilisk Heilbo slithered into position and sank fangs into an unscaled patch, injecting all his venom. The dragon howled and turned to freeze the attacker, only to meet two burning orange-yellow eyes. The basilisk's gaze seared the dragon's soul. It reeled in agony. Dewey reappeared, beside the dragon this time, and again cast Avada Kedavra. Between the basilisk's lethal stare and Dewey's curse, the dragon's soul was badly wounded. Surrounded by Dewey, Smaug, Thorondor, the Fiendfire Balrog, and Heilbo, while below the black savage warriors and Rohirrim watched diligently, the frost dragon for the first time felt mortal fear. It unleashed a blast of cold to ward them off and turned, fleeing toward the misty mountains. It knew the human realms lay to the east and south, the Rohan and Gondor, and that only the north, into the jagged mountain passes, offered a true chance at escape. "Chase it! Don't let it reach the mountains!" Dewey shouted. He shifted into Obscurus and became a black wind after Glaurung. He had heard the dragon's thoughts and knew its hatred would never forget him. This creature would live only to take vengeance later. Dewey preferred to prevent future trouble. For the first time, he flew by will in his Obscurus form, weightless and incorporeal. He closed on the retreating dragon, disintegrating into mist to avoid another cone of frigid breath, then regrouping to smother Glaurung's flanks with corrosive blackness. The dragon answered by spouting cold at its own body to freeze and repel the shadow. Even Dewey dared not stand in that chill and swerved away. Smaug and Thorondor arrived, Bilbo coiling around Smaug's flank. From above, Smaug poured dragonfire down. Bilbo's hypnotic eyes struck again. The basilisk's gaze opened a wound that interrupted Glorung's stream of cold, and Smaug's fire melted the ice armor. Thorondor dove, ripped away slabs of scale with his talons, and blood and breath steamed in the frigid air. "Strike while it's weakened," Dewey urged, and hurled Avada Kedavra once more. The dragon's soul fire dimmed. It reeled as if on the edge of extinction. Rage and desperation warped its eyes. "If you want me dead," it snarled, "then we'll all die together." A cold deeper than before burst from its body as a low, rumbling growl drew in the surrounding natural energy. Smaug saw it first and barked a warning. "Not good, Master. It's using dragon magic to sacrifice its life force. Fall back!" Dewey didn't hesitate. The Obscurus whirled away. Seconds later, an all-consuming wave of cold exploded outward. A ring of death froze everything in its path. Trees, rocks, insects, birds, air itself catching the sheen of ice. The blast reached over 10 miles. Because Smaug had warned them and Dewey had retreated and cast protective wards, they avoided being caught at the center and were spared death, though each bore a crust of frost. Bilbo was sluggish from the cold, teetering toward hibernation. Thorondor Smaug and his stony-winged passenger managed to withdraw in time. At the center of the frozen wasteland, Glorung remained alive. In truth, the dragon had not given its entire life. At the last instant, it had held back, sacrificing only a portion to unleash the freeze, enough to force them back, but not enough to kill itself utterly. Now weakened and unable to breathe cold freely, the frost dragon dragged what remained of its strength and fled deeper into the misty mountains, limping into the white mists and disappearing from sight. Chapter 261, Feigning Compliance. When the frost dragon turned and fled, Dewey gave no hesitation. After him. Smaug and Thorondor surged forward at once. Only Basilisk Bilbo, numbed by the dragon's cold, clung to consciousness and teetered on the edge of hibernation. He had little fight left, so Dewey left him to sleep, planning to retrieve him on the way back. The frost dragon ran like a mountain in motion. More than 1,000 meters long, he crossed the towering ridges of the misty mountains as if walking a plain. Dewey and his companions pursued from behind, raining spells and flame upon him. The dragon's cold breath was still unavailable from his earlier outburst, but he remained formidable. That earlier blast had encased him in an even tougher shell of ice that Smaug's fire could not melt quickly. Dewey, too, could not hold his Obscurus shape for long. He reverted to human form and rode Smaug's back as they chased north along the central range. They cut through countless peaks until they reached the slopes of Silverlode Peak near Moria. From afar, the dwarves on Durin's tower caught sight of the convulsion of shapes, the unfamiliar, colossal frost dragon, the red gold of Smaug, and the enormous silhouette of Thorondor. They had seen Smaug and the giant eagle before, but never anything of that scale. Horns blared in alarm all across the valley. Dewey ignored the clamor and kept his eyes fixed on the dragon. The frost dragon staggered and panted, not from the fatigue of flight, but from the venom coursing through him. Basilisk Bilbo had pumped what felt like barrels of poison into the beast. A single drop could fell an elephant. For such a creature to still stand after that much venom made Dewey respect its resilience, and made him all the more wary. A cornered beast with that kind of endurance was the deadliest kind of opponent. The ice that had protected the frost dragon was melting under Smaug's relentless flame. The dragon's voice, ragged and pleading, lifted toward them. "Wizard, please, I will surrender. Spare my life and I will serve you, like your little dragon there." Dewey raised an eyebrow. "You would surrender to me? Is that true?" The frost dragon bowed his great head and nodded. "Yes, truly." Smaug's scales bristled, remembered. He looked at the frost dragon like a thief before a horde. "Master, don't listen. He's lying. There are no good dragons in this world besides us." But the frost dragon was not done. He leaned forward and tempted Dewey with everything he had. "Take me instead. I have existed since the ancient days. I know secrets about my former master Morgoth. I am far stronger than that petty dragon. Help me, and you could rule this world. I could supplant Sauron." Dewey listened, as if considering. "If you surrender, you must swear a magical oath, sign a binding contract, obey every command without question. Can you do that?" For a breath, the dragon hesitated, then, surrounded by Dewey's wand and Smaug's watchful glare, he bowed his great head again. "I will." Dewey smiled and said, "Then I will apparat onto your back. Do not resist. We will seal the oath." Smaug flared with anxiety. "Master, don't be fooled. He's old and cunning. He can't truly submit." "Quiet, Smaug. You are my closest ally," Dewey soothed, patting the dragon's flank, and then vanished in a shimmer of apparition. A few seconds later, he materialized atop the frost dragon's back, wand in hand. "We'll bind this with a blood oath," he said. "One drop of your blood and one of mine, merged to make the contract. Do not resist." The frost dragon obediently bit his tongue, and blood welled, quick and cold. "Is that enough?" he asked. Dewey waved him off. "One drop is all I need. Bring it, close." The frost dragon lowered his head. For a moment his eyes were soft and accommodating. Then, as he leaned in, those eyes flashed cruel and sudden. A stream of deadly cold burst from his throat. Dewey was taken off guard and froze solid in an instant, crystallizing into an ice statue. "Master!" Smaug roared in shock. Thorondor gave a mournful cry and dove at the dragon in fury. The frost dragon blasted him with cold. Thorondor twisted and evaded enough to avoid total annihilation, but one wing caught the frost and seized. The eagle's wings stiffened and failed. He fell like a stone. The frost dragon laughed, a rancorous, exultant sound. "Foolish human, so easy to deceive." He stared at the frozen Dewey, eyes glittering with triumph. He had never lost his breath weapon. He had only pretended to, baiting his prey. "My master was the great Dark Lord Morgoth. Not even Sauron could bend me. A mere wizard. How amusing." He swallowed the ice-encased figure in one gulp and sneered up at Smaug. "You, descended from Encalagon, bow to a human? What disgrace! With your master eaten, be gone!" The frost dragon wanted to eat Smaug too, but one wing was broken and he could not reach the others in the sky. He spat contempt and turned away. A voice called from thin air. "Who said your master is dead?" Dewey stood on Smaug's back, alive and casually amused. The frost dragon's eyes went wide. "Impossible. I swallowed you. How are you? What did I just eat?" Dewey smiled. "You ate quickly for an old dragon. Do you feel warmth in your belly? I suspected your stomach was cold, so I left you something to warm it up. Balrog fire crystals and the like." Their duel of deception had deepened. Both had been pretending. The seconds Dewey spent appearing on the frost dragon's back had not been lost. He had been elsewhere, setting a trap. The thing the dragon had swallowed was not Dewey at all, but a transfigured mithril furnace, shaped to look like him, containing the Balrog fire crystals. Dewey had portkeyed that imitation onto the dragon's back, and now he activated it. Balrog fire crystals condensed in Balrog layers over centuries, embers of a higher, fiercer flame than dragon fire. They could melt mithril and would not be snuffed by the frost dragon's cold. When the mimic furnace inside the dragon's belly opened, the crystal's heat poured outward. Inside the beast, the mithril casing burst and Balrog heat roared free. The freezing stomach became an inferno. Gastric fluid steamed into vapor. The surrounding walls of the organ blistered and swelled. The cavity ballooned and blistered like an overinflated bellows. The frost dragon's roar was a raw, agonized sound that shook the mountains and distracted dwarves in Moria. He rolled and bucked, smashing boulders and tearing conifers in his thrashing. Steam and scalding air hissed from his mouth like a boiling kettle. Dewey watched, expression cold, as the dragon's belly reddened from within. Flesh glowed like cooked shell. The massive creature writhed, eyes wide with pain, and a final, furious disbelief. When the dragon's strength had finally been sapped and his breath faltered, Dewey raised his staff and said quietly, deliberately, "Avada Kedavra." The killing curse struck true. The frost dragon's shriek cut off. His pupils dilated to black, then he went still. The vast, ancient body finally ceased to breathe. Chapter 262, Dragon Crystal. The frost dragon's final death left Dewey able to exhale for the first time in hours. Even slain, the beast still radiated intense heat. It had swallowed the furnace that contained the fire demon's fire crystal, and hot air still hissed from its mouth. Dewey, however, gave the corpse only a passing glance before apparating to where giant eagle Thorondor had fallen. Thorondor lay in the center of a flattened swath of forest, battered but alive. Dewey's heart clenched. He pulled out a clutch of potions and fed them to the great bird. The injuries were serious but not fatal. One wing was frostbitten and unusable for the moment. Thorondor wasn't like other pets. Abandoned by his kin and raised by Duir, his loyalty ran deep and personal. He wasn't bound by contract magic and had attacked the frost dragon in a desperate, crazed attempt to avenge Duir when he thought his master had been eaten. Seeing him injured tore at Duir. After calming Thorondor, Duir turned his attention back to the dragon. The carcass was mountain-sized, over 1,000 meters long, and still awe-inspiring. Had Duir not taken the frost dragon by surprise and used the fire demon's fire crystal to destroy it from within, he doubted he could have finished off such an ancient, powerful beast. He almost laughed at the thought that Saruman had used an eerily similar trick, hiding Ungoliant's venom inside a fell beast to tempt the dragon. If the frost dragon had fallen for both, it made you think it had a weak spot for anything it could swallow. "How are we going to move this?" Duir muttered, staring at the enormous corpse. It was nearly 10 times Smaug's size. There was no way Smaug could haul it. But first they had to retrieve the furnace from the dragon's belly. Duir set Smaug to the task. The dragon's defenses had been astounding. Ordinary cutting charms barely made a mark. Even Aeglos and the fireblade were like toothpicks against its thick hide, and a full thrust of the spear couldn't penetrate the heavy layers of muscle and fat. Smaug used claws and teeth instead, and, after a long struggle, pried the belly open. A blast of scalding air rushed out. Even Smaug, who was usually unbothered by dragonfire, winced. Duir slapped a ward up to shield himself. Inside, the organs looked boiled, where the stomach had been burned through and the blood had mostly evaporated. Duir resealed the furnace immediately with a containment spell. Only then did the heat relent. He moved on to the heart. Huge as a house and still radiating an icy chill, the frost dragon's heart felt different from the rest of the boiled organs. Duir pulled a mithril container from his spatial bag, cast undetectable extension on it, and bracing himself, plunged Aeglos into the heart. A sapphire-blue, bone-chilling blood welled out and flowed into the container. Even a touch would freeze a hand. Duir carefully collected what he could. The heart yielded enough to fill about 30 barrels before it ran dry. Dragon blood, especially from an ancient frost dragon, was a priceless ingredient, one of the essentials for an elixir of life. He sealed the container with preservation wards and tucked it away. He then removed the entire heart and laid it on a slab. With a sharp mithril knife, he cut it open and harvested a 2-meter-long heart nerve, a dragon heartstring. This one hummed with icy power. Paired with the right wand wood, it would make a formidable core, especially for spells that amplified cold. Duir bagged the heartstring and the massive heart, then collected liver, lungs, kidneys, and other organs. They were all valuable potion ingredients. He wasn't going to leave them behind. "Master, I sense something in its head," Smaug said, poking at the dragon's brow. Duir climbed onto the enormous skull and followed Smaug's direction. He rammed Aeglos into the forehead, and with a great deal of effort, split the dragon's skull. Nestled inside was an irregular, ice-blue crystal the size of a soccer ball. It radiated an extreme cold and a faint azure glow. As it met the open air, the temperature around it plunged and breath turned to frost. Aeglos frosted over the instant it touched the crystal, and the chill ran down the spear to Dui's hand, almost numbing it. Duir had never seen anything like it. Smaug, though, grinned. "That's a dragon crystal," he said. "It's the source of this frost dragon's power, why it can breathe that terrible cold." "A dragon crystal?" Duir asked. "What does it do?" Smaug hopped excitedly. "It's the core of a dragon's might. If another dragon eats one, it can grow stronger. Dragons used to kill each other not just for hoards, but to devour each other's crystals. You can also fashion them into magical artifacts to channel powerful effects." Duir looked at Smaug. "So do you have one in your head?" Smaug startled coiled. "No, not all dragons get dragon crystals. Only the very old, very powerful ones. I've lived a little over 1,000 years. I'm still young. I don't have one." Duir didn't press him. Instead, he waved the crystal free. It floated into his hand and then drifted in front of Smaug. "If this crystal is useful to you, it's yours." Smaug's eyes went wide. He had tried to keep his longing under his scales, but it had been obvious. "You mean it? You'll give it to me?" Duir smiled and nodded. "Really, but I'm puzzled. This one is pure ice. Your attribute is fire. Can you even eat it?" Fire and ice were natural opposites. Duir thought of the frost dragon's fate. how it had died after swallowing the demon's fire crystal, and worried Smaug might get ill. Smaug's grin turned feral. Of course I can. Dragons share a common origin. Even with different attributes, I can absorb it. I just won't be able to breathe fire until I fully digest it. Then, as if to prove the point, Smaug gulped the crystal. A shiver ran through him. Frost laced his scales. He grew stiff, and a powdering of rime dusted his hide. When he exhaled, black smoke bellowed out instead of flame, and the breath carried a frigid chill. Dewey watched, half amused, half exasperated. No one's fighting you for it. You didn't have to swallow it so quickly. He regarded Smaug, whose wings were momentarily sluggish. Can you still fly? Smaug looked like a statue, but after a few awkward flaps, he managed to stagger into the air. He wouldn't be at full strength yet, but he could fly enough not to be an extra burden. At that moment, a party of dwarves approached over the scorched plain. The leader was Balin, clad in mithril and carrying Durin's axe. Dewey hadn't expected company. Balin, what brings you here? Dewey asked. Balin folded Dewey into a hearty embrace, then stepped back with a wide grin. Our lookouts in Durin's tower saw the figures of Smaug and Thorondor and sent word. I suspected you would be nearby. He pushed his astonished gaze toward the frost dragon's carcass. I thought Smaug was huge, but I never imagined a dragon like this existed. Balin looked at Dewey with awe. Dewey, you're incredible. To tame Smaug, and now to slay a dragon even larger. It's staggering. Dewey waved off the praise. It wasn't just me. Smaug, Thorondor, Bilbo, and the others all pulled together. Luck helped too. Balin's expression sobered. There's another matter I need to trouble you with. Chapter 263, Dragon Meat Baku. Flying south from the misty mountains, Smaug gripped the great eagle Thorondor in one talon, while Duir stood on the dragon's scaled back. In Duir's hands was a heavy, gleaming box of mithril alloy, a gift from Balin. Duir had lined the interior with an undetectable extension charm so it could contain what lay inside, the corpse of a frost dragon. Before Duir left Moria, Balin had admired a tooth Duir handed him from the fallen beast. The dwarf had treasured it, and with other craftsmen began plans to forge a dragon-tooth sword of mithril, a weapon that, years hence, would become one of Moria's proud heirlooms alongside the axe of Durin. For now, however, the tooth was only the promise of a future relic. Smaug's body radiated cold. Since swallowing the dragon crystal of the ancient frost dragon, he had lost his fire. His breath was icy, and his body had gone into a chilled, weakened state. Duir could feel the frost in the air even as he stood on Smaug's back. How long until you absorb the crystal fully? Duir asked. The frost dragon's crystal is vast, Smaug replied. It will take at least 10 years to assimilate all of it. 10 years? Duir's voice betrayed a flicker of disbelief. Smaug chuckled softly. Not long at all, master. This crystal is the life of a first-age dragon. When I take it into myself, I will inherit its strength and scale, perhaps surpass it. The gain is the work of centuries compressed into a single life. Duir hesitated. And during those 10 years, you cannot breathe flame? It will not be that long, Smaug corrected. In a year or two, I can suppress the cold enough to summon fire again, but to fully blend the crystal's power will require the decade. Relief washed over Duir. 1 or 2 years without Smaug's fire was inconvenient, but not catastrophic. Smaug added, a little sheepishly, once we return, I will enter a deep sleep to hasten digestion and absorption. I won't be able to assist you while I sleep. Sleep then, Duir said with a wave. We will manage. He thought it likely Mordor would not strike again at once after such losses, and besides, he had other allies at hand. Thorondor, the basilisk Bilbo, the kraken, the three-headed wolf Cerberus among them. He took Bilbo, who still lay in hibernation curled in the dragon's crevices, and placed her into the mithril box beside the frost dragon's body. Together with Smaug and Thorondor, he set course for Isengard. What met them at Isengard was devastation. Trees lay splintered, boulders shattered, the earth pocked with deep craters. The concentric walls around the tower were broken ruins, and frost that had not melted stained the ground. Even Orthanc bore damage. Its spire had been fractured, and its crown collapsed. It was the worst Duir had ever seen his lands suffer. Dunlending warriors and the cavalry of Rohan still held the approach around Orthanc, tense and alert. Brog, chieftain of the Dunlendings, led patrols on the remaining hippogriffs. The great griffin Aslan kept watch from higher air, and Cerberus, surprisingly restrained, prowled the perimeter, his 3 heads angled in 3 directions like living sentries. When Smaug set Thorondor gently on the ground and Duir strode forward, relief rippled through the defenders. "Lord Duir," they called, rushing to meet him. Brog hurried up. "What happened to the eagle?" he asked, concern in his voice. "One wing was frozen by the frost dragon's breath," Duir explained. "He can't fly yet, but he'll recover." Thorondor raised his head and gave a clear, strong cry. He was shaken but otherwise unharmed. "And the frost dragon?" King Thengel of Rohan demanded. "Did he escape?" Duir smiled and lifted the mithril box. "He's in here." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Brog's face went pale. "You mean he's dead?" Duir opened the box. The enchanted space within seemed to swallow the light, occupied by the enormous, glimmering length of the frost dragon's body. The air that rose from it was like a cold wind. Heilbo lay tucked in a cavity against the dragon's ribs and did not stir. The sight confirmed what none of them had dared hope. The frost dragon was indeed slain. Shock turned quickly to elation. These were people who had felt the beast's terror firsthand. Their homes and fields had been nearly swept away. That Duir had brought the dragon down filled them with a new, fierce reverence. One by one, the warriors returned the items they had taken in the desperate battle. Brog presented the golden bow with bowed deference. Mithril arrows had been expended. King Thengel returned the horn of victory. Thengel's expression was reluctant. That horn had turned the tide more than once, and its voice on the field was intoxicating. But he accepted that such a relic was not truly his to keep. Duir took them back without ceremony and thanked the chieftains. "Your aid saved Isengard today," he said. "I will not forget it." He gestured with a whistle. The remaining hippogriffs circled and came to land. Duir turned to Brog. "You and your people risked everything to ride back and save Isengard. I am grateful. Those hippogriffs will be yours, mounts and companions." Brog and the Dunlendings erupted into joyful shouts. They had revered the beasts from afar, but never dared hope their lord would hand them over. Thengel watched with a private envy. Duir met the king's gaze. "You led half your cavalry here when Rohan needed it. For that, I accept your friendship." Duir produced a small sapphire brooch and pinned it to Thengel's cloak. "This is a portkey. If Rohan is ever in mortal peril, touch this sapphire 3 times and it will bring the holder to me. I will come." Thengel's eyes shone. A promise like that was worth more than any mount. He thanked Duir and vowed to preserve the brooch as a family heirloom to be used only in the gravest hour. Duir did not forget the rest of the fighters. He smiled at them and announced, "To celebrate our victory, we will hold an open-air feast tonight. The main course will be dragon meat." A roar of astonished delight answered him. The dead dragons lay spread across the field, Saruman's bred beasts annihilated, many of Duir's own creatures lost as well. It was a grim harvest, but one the tired soldiers welcomed. "First," Duir added, "we will restore these grounds." He raised his staff. The ring on his finger flared with power. The scars of battle began to knit themselves closed. Pitted earth filled, shattered walls knit back together, trees straightened as if a hand smoothed their wounds. The defenders watched in open-mouthed awe as the scene reversed, the landscape healing under Duir's will. They looked at him then with new reverence, not merely as a leader, but as a force who could stand against ruin and make things whole again. Chapter 264, Dragon Meat Q. When Isengard was restored to its former state, everyone stood in stunned silence, unable to tell whether they were still dreaming. The ruined walls and splintered wood were gone. The place looked as if it had never been touched by war. Only the dragon carcasses scattered across the field betrayed the truth of what had happened. Dewey waved his wand once more. Broken benches and shattered stones melted into polished wooden tables and stone platforms. The meadow became a wide, open banquet ground with seating enough for tens of thousands. From a golden cup he produced an endless supply of fine wine and delicacies, setting them out across every table. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd. Then Dewey unveiled the pièce de résistance, several dragons Saruman had raised for just such an occasion. They were tens of meters long, hulking beasts, and when Dewey explained that some of these dragons were hybrids, crosses between dragons and fell beasts, whose flesh was poisonous, There was an attentive hush. The other dragons, however, were perfectly edible. With a flourish, he declared that everyone could have as much dragon meat as they wanted. The warriors exploded in cheers and swarmed the carcasses. Dragon meat was legendary. To eat it was to make a claim to greatness that could be told to one's children and grandchildren. As the men set to work cutting and roasting, Dewey did not forget his own companions. Smaug, with no sense of kinship for these particular dragons, tore into an entire carcass by himself. Thorondor, the giant eagle, Aslan the griffin, and the three-headed hound Cerberus all received their portions. Cerberus, impervious to the toxic blood of the hybrid dragon fell beasts, was given the poisonous carcasses outright and promptly claimed them all, more meat than even Smaug received. He stood proudly on a dragon's flank, his tails wagging with delight. Basilisk Herpo missed the banquet. He was in deep hibernation. Then again, Herpo's favorite meal was acromantula, and the Chamber of Secrets still stored countless spider carcasses, so he had little reason to complain later. Dewey sat at the center of the feast, flanked by Brog, leader of the Black Barbarians, and King Thengel of Rohan. They sampled the dragon barbecues alongside the other treats. Dragon meat was notoriously hard to cook. Dragon hides resisted fire, but these were cold dragons, hybrids with frostworms, and their meat was less resistant than true dragon flesh. Dewey speared a chunk, tasted it, and found it pleasantly chewy, not unlike beef. As he ate, he felt a surge through his body, a warmth and vitality that chased away the battle weariness. Blood and chi rose in his limbs. It was like a potent tonic. Brog and Thengel felt it too. The king's cheeks flushed, sweat beaded on his brow, and a glow spread through him as old aches eased. Both men abandoned the other delicacies and went to work on the dragon meat with single-minded fervor. The same happened across the field. Hidden ailments faded, strength returned, and every warrior began to feel years younger. Even the most battered among them felt renewed, hungry again only for more dragon meat. Dewey was not worried the supply would run out. Mordor had sent dozens of dragons. Each beast was tens of meters long and tipped the scales at tons. Even 10,000 men could be fed with only a handful of corpses. Still, there were dozens of carcasses to process, and Dewey winced at the thought of storing all that meat and material. Rather than wrestle with expansion charm boxes and preservation alone, he enlisted the soldiers to help. Under his direction, they cut out dragon hearts, livers, brains, and other potion ingredients, packing them into barrels until the stacks rose like hills. Dragon hide, scales, and teeth were all gathered. The hides were perfect for making magic-resistant garments and armor. Scales could become shields or the basis for rune work, and teeth and bone would be used in potions and weaponry. As a token of thanks, Dewey handed every man a dragon scale. The scales were enormous, harder than ordinary metal, and valuable beyond measure, large enough to make a shield and worthy of becoming a family heirloom. Despite the abundance, the banquet's ravenous appetites consumed only 2 dragons. Sated and luxuriant, the crowd lay back, bellies full, faces flushed and steaming from the restorative heat in their blood. Every warrior present had gained something significant from the meat, their hidden weaknesses eased, their vitality restored. King Thengel, feeling years younger, clasped Dewey's hand. "Wizard Duir," the king said, voice wavering with gratitude, "you have done us a great favor. My knee used to trouble me terribly. It feels so much better." Dewey accepted the thanks and, as a keepsake, gave the king the bones of one of the dragons that had been eaten. Brog received a complete skeletal set as well. Thengel later had craftsmen in Adoras assemble the bones into a 3-dimensional dragon display that stood in the royal hall. Brog used his dragon skeleton as the frame for a vast golden tent crowned with a dragon's head, his dragon court, where the Black Barbarian leaders would meet for generations. Once everyone had eaten, Thengel prepared to leave. He worried about the scattered forces of Mordor, and more urgently, about Gondor to the south. Rohan owed its allegiance to Gondor and had been unable to come to its aid when Mordor first struck. Now, with Rohan secure, Thengel felt compelled to ride for Gondor. "I wonder how Gondor fares," he admitted, looking toward the White Mountains with anxiety. "We swore to stand with them. I hope we are not too late." Dewey placed a reassuring hand on the king's shoulder. "Isengard was Mordor's principal target. They have failed here. Their attacks elsewhere should be weakening. Gandalf has gone to Gondor with the port key I gave him. If Minas Tirith were lost, he would return by it. He has the leadership to rally the Rohirrim and the men of Gondor. I do not think their hope is gone yet." Thengel relaxed slightly, but did not hesitate. To be safe, he resolved to move at maximum speed. Traveling from Isengard to Edoras would take 3 days at a gallop. Reaching Gondor would take longer. To get his cavalry away swiftly, Duir produced a box large enough to hold the Rohirrim, and a black barbarian warrior mounted a hippogriff to carry the king and the box eastward at top speed. With Thengel gone, Duir set about the rest of his tasks. He herded the surviving dragons back to the dragon farm and organized the processing of the dozens of corpses, supervising the sorting of hides, scales, teeth, bones, and the more delicate potion-grade organs. He could not do it alone. The black barbarians were tireless and well used to hard labor, and under Duir's direction, the work was finished quickly. Meanwhile, in Gondor, things were far from secure. Gandalf's arrival had turned despair into organization. With Narya, the Ring of Fire, he inspired courage and steadied fear. He gathered the fleeing soldiers, reorganized the defense, and reawakened the will to fight. But even Gandalf had not expected the force Mordor had brought to bear on Gondor, more than a dozen flightless cold dragons. These cold dragons had no wings. They were not the sweeping aerial terrors of myth, but they were enormous, some like giant crocodiles, some like immense pythons, others like great limbless lizards. Their scales were thick and their bodies so massive that ordinary soldiers were helpless before them. They smashed through gates, crushed soldiery beneath their bulk, and their momentum disintegrated the city's organized defense. Mordor's ground forces, led by these crushing beasts, pressed toward Minas Tirith with terrifying speed. Regent Ecthelion stood beneath the withered white tree, looking out at the approaching host. The sight stole the color from his face. The city's fate looked bleak, and despair shadowed every heart as Gondor braced itself for the storm. Chapter 265, The Battle of Gondor. Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, was cut into the flank of the White Mountains like a stairway, its 7 tiers each ringed by its own wall and gate. The roads that climbed to the summit wound around the hill rather than running straight up, designed to slow any attacker. It was a fortress built to be easy to defend and nearly impossible to take, a fact that had become legend. Now, however, Mordor's host lay at its feet, and a dozen massive cold dragons loomed over the battlefield. Fear and despair hung over the city as soldiers and civilians alike watched the mounting threat. Then, as if summoned by hope, Gandalf appeared from the rear of Mordor's lines, mounted on Shadowfax. The great horse moved like a gale, leaving only an afterimage. The orcs had no time to stop him. Shadowfax threaded through the enemy ranks as though they were empty fields, Gandalf's staff held high and pouring forth a dazzling holy light. The light drove back orcs and trolls, and even the specially bred Uruk-hai and Oglok trolls, those told to fear no sunlight, shrank away from him. Behind Gandalf surged several thousand Gondor soldiers he had gathered and reorganized along the way. Their courage rekindled by his arrival, they raised their weapons and charged, untroubled by being outnumbered 10 to 1. Gandalf led them, staff in one hand and foe hammer in the other. The blinding light scattered the enemy while his blade cut a swath through them. At length, he leapt from Shadowfax onto the back of a cold dragon, scrambled up its spine as it reared, and braced against its jaws. He fixed his staff into the beast's mouth to hold it open and thrust his sword deep into its upper jaw. With a wrenching twist, the dragon went rigid and collapsed, dead. Gandalf drew Foehammer free, withdrew his staff, then produced, improbably, a flying broom from a pocket of his cloak. Mounting it, he streaked away toward another dragon while Shadowfax vanished like wind through the ranks, untouchable. From the walls, the regent watched, elated by Gandalf's slaughter of a dragon. He gave the order at once. Sally forth, link up with Gandalf and the reinforcements, and strike the enemy together. Gondor's men on the battlements aided the sortie with bow and catapult. Gandalf, now astride the broom, darted between the cold dragons, baiting them and drawing their attention. He moved with such agility they could not catch him. When he wished, he unleashed the ringed holy light to blind them. Panic-stricken and sightless, the dragons thrashed blindly. Their tail sweeps and stomps hurled orcs and trolls into the air and crushed many beneath them. They could not be slain all at once. Gandalf rode back to the Citadel's 7th level and found the regent. "Your Grace," he said, "send oil barrels up to the walls. Use catapults to douse those dragons and then set them alight." The regent needed no urging. Soldiers hauled every available barrel of oil to the walls, and the catapults flung them in. Barrels smashed against dragon hides and splashed them in oil. Gandalf then called upon the power of a ring of fire he bore. The blades, spearheads, and arrows of Gondor's soldiers burst into flame. Flaming arrows rained down upon the dragons. Gondor infantry, swords burning, charged into the orc lines. The arrows could not pierce the dragons' thick scales, but the oil caught quickly, and within moments the cold dragons were engulfed in flame. Dragons become true dragons. Roaring in agony, they rampaged through Mordor's ranks, trampling men, igniting tents and siege engines, and setting the battlefield afire. The once disciplined host dissolved into chaos. The regent seized the moment and ordered a full assault. Surrounded and leaderless, Mordor's troops began to fall back. Gandalf, weaving among the chaos, sought the enemy commanders. He found an orc chieftain rallying from the rear and charged. Archers loosed a hail of arrows at him, but Foehammer was a blur. He deflected the volley and cleaved through the chieftain's neck in one clean stroke. He cut down the Mordor banner. Without its standard and commander, the army's cohesion collapsed. Soldiers fled for Mordor while Gondor pursued. The flaming dragons, though burned, still lived and raged. Perhaps the rout had given them a cause. They stampeded east toward the Anduin, hoping to douse the flames in the river. Gandalf chased them, and in the pursuit he slew 2 more with Foehammer. But before he could finish the pursuit, the armies at Osgiliath, spanning the Anduin, counterattacked. There Mordor held troops not only of orcs and trolls, but also Easterlings from Rhûn, Haradrim, and Black Númenóreans from the south. A few cold dragons had been pressed into service as living bridges, their immense bodies bridging the waters so the host could cross. The Gondor forces pressing after the fleeing enemy found themselves stalled at Osgiliath, and their morale sagged. If Osgiliath could not be recaptured, the road into Gondor's heartland would be open. Gandalf would not stand aside. He wheeled back to rouse the weary defenders and restore their spirit. The flaming dragons finally reached the Anduin and quenched their burns in its waters. But the battle for the river and the bridge turned into a hard, bitter contest. Then a figure from the north broke the stalemate. A hippogriff flew over the field bearing King Thengel of Rohan. Gandalf swept to meet him on the broom. "King Thengel, you here, a relief I did not expect," Gandalf called. Thengel and Gandalf were old friends. Thengel smiled and nodded. Wizard Duir and the wild men drove off Mordor's forces who assaulted Rohan. They pushed on to aid Isengard, and now they have come to lend Gondor their strength. "Isengard attacked?" Gandalf asked, puzzled. Thengel sighed, then replied with a mix of dread and triumph. "It wasn't only Saruman. He brought a frost dragon the size of 10 smogs, dozens more dragons, and 8 black riders from Mordor." He brightened. "But Wizard Duir is a force of nature. He slew that frost dragon. The rest were butchered. Saruman alone fled, and he treated us to dragon meat afterward. We are all wonderfully restored." Gandalf laughed ruefully at the missed feast. Then the two wasted no time. Thengel opened a small box he carried. It suddenly swelled, its lid becoming a gateway wide enough for 2 horses abreast. Cavalry poured forth. Mounted Rohirrim charged, Thengel on his warhorse, the hippogriff and wild men taking their leave. The arrival of Rohan's riders lifted allied morale to a new height. Gandalf rode the broom to the shattered Osgiliath bridge and used staff and sword to clear the span. With a final thunderous strike of his staff, the bridge's deck crumbled, sending the Mordor soldiers standing upon it plunging into the river. Only Gandalf hovered above them. He turned his gaze to the cold dragons in the water. Instead of attacking, he began to chant. The Anduin, which had roared and boiled with war, stilled as his spell took hold. The dragons, uneasy, tried to scramble ashore, but before any could reach the bank, a towering wall of water rose up upstream like a living thing and swept down with terrible force. Even the mighty dragons, vast as they were, could not resist its power. They were carried away by the flood, borne downstream, and drove on toward the sea. There, the ocean's currents did them no favor. Powerful undercurrents dragged the exhausted beasts into the deep, and one by one they vanished beneath the waves, gone without a trace. With the dragons swept away and Mordor's host routed, the Battle of Gondor had been decided. Chapter 266, Making the Elixir of Life. The war ended with a decisive victory for the allied forces of Gondor and Rohan. Gandalf's flood swept the cold dragons out to sea and broke the bridge over the Anduin. The Mordor contingents in Osgiliath's western district found themselves cut off and thrown into panic. Allied troops that pushed into the district annihilated them. A few desperate soldiers tried to swim the Anduin only to be carried away by the current. Meanwhile, Duir used the lull to travel by Hearthfire to Lothlorien and Rivendell, checking on the wider situation. Lothlorien was secure beneath Galadriel's barrier. Sauron's orcs could not penetrate the forest and were forced to circle outside. Rivendell had not been so fortunate. Orcs under a new orc king had poured down from the misty mountains. The mountains were an endless source of orcs, impossible to purge completely, and crossed the Bruinen to assault the valley. Elrond personally led the elven cavalry to meet them. Eladon and Elrohir rode at his side, and Arwen fought with them too. They were mounted on winged horses, each combining sword and spell. Using the magic Duir had taught them, the three fought like a single, terrible force. Orcs fell before them as if cut down like chives, and even volleys of arrows could not touch them. Under the cover of her brothers, Arwen rode like a war goddess to the Orc King and finished him with a bone-shattering charm. With their leader gone, the orcs broke and fled toward the Bruinen, where Elrond again summoned a flood that drowned half of the retreating host. The elven cavalry pursued to the foot of the misty mountains before finally halting. Elrond and his company were surprised by Duir's sudden arrival. They were even more astonished when he recounted the fighting at Isengard. Arwen, shaken, was alternately frightened and relieved. Duir stayed to comfort her until he could see her calm again. To celebrate Rivendell's triumph, Duir produced a dragon from his space pocket as the centerpiece for the feast. Elves had long lives, but none had ever eaten dragon before. The sight of that massive beast brought wide-eyed wonder. Elrond, though aware that Duir kept dragons, never expected to sit down to dragon meat. He accepted Duir's gift at once and ordered the elven chefs to prepare it as a reward for their victory. Even Glorfindel, usually reclusive, was drawn to the banquet. The chefs, trained for centuries, faced the dragon's enormity with artistry. They roasted and grilled, made steaks, stews, meatballs, and patties, a virtually complete dragon meat spread. As descendants of powerful creatures of Middle-earth, the elves found dragon flesh particularly nourishing, their faces flushed with vigor as they ate freely for a time. After the feast, Duir and Arwen spent a private evening together before parting reluctantly. Rather than remain at Isengard, he returned to Weathertop. After such a battle, there would be a period of uneasy peace before Sauron or Saruman could strike with overwhelming force. Hogsmeade at Weathertop's foot remained peaceful. Most townsfolk never even knew their lord held lands as far away as Isengard. Before returning home, Duir made a clandestine trip to Hildorien in the Far East. He had hidden Hildorien with a Fidelius charm and the blessing of Ilúvatar himself. It was a place so secluded that no Palantir could reveal it. To be safe from Sauron's spies, he had previously portkeyed the Philosopher's Stone there. Retrieving the stone, he returned to Weathertop and first tended to the hibernating basilisk Herpo. Then he turned to the potion room. He had just finished carving out a large ingredient storage chamber, runed with mithril symbols on walls and floor to act like a vast refrigerator. Into that cold, enchanted vault, he placed the barrels and carcasses he had salvaged, dragon blood, livers, brains, and more. The battle at Isengard had been close, but it yielded enormous gains. A slain frost dragon and dozens of Saruman's brood left behind. 2 dragons had been used to entertain the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim, and another had gone to Rivendell, but Duir still had more material than he could easily store. The mithril runes solved that problem. With his hoard secured, Duir began the delicate work he had been planning, making the elixir of life. He first prepared a cauldron of pure gold, transmuted by the Philosopher's Stone until every impurity had been removed. Purity of vessel, he knew, was essential. Even 99.9% commercial gold left contaminants that could spoil the elixir. Only a stone-transmuted cauldron would suffice. From the herb garden, he fetched a mandrake. Having silenced it with a tongue-tying curse, he drew a tube of its green sap with a syringe. The mandrake, drained of its juice, withered and fled, burrowing back into the earth in terror. Dewey ignored its whimpers and returned to the potion room. He set the pure gold cauldron over the fire and poured in dew collected from the leaves of the holy white tree. The original recipe called for evening primrose dew, an ingredient rare in the wider magic world, a bloom that opens at full moon night and whose dew carries moonlight's properties. But Middle-earth had no evening primroses. The holy white tree was a superior substitute. Crafted by Yavanna in imitation of Telperion, one of the two trees of Valinor, it was essentially Telperion reborn as a silver-flowered tree of the moon. Its dew held even more lunar quality than primrose dew. He heated the dew, then added the distillate of the mandrake and brought the mixture to a boil. Into the boiling brew, he dropped the Philosopher's Stone itself and stirred counterclockwise 7 times with a pure gold rod. Then he reduced the flame to a simmer and let it cook for 24 hours. He cast a ward around the cauldron to prevent disturbance and left the room. First, he went to the vault to check on Smaug. The great dragon had returned to Weathertop ahead of him, carrying the injured great eagle Thorondor, whose broken wings left him unable to fly. Smaug lay in a deep, unnatural slumber. Normally, the greedy beast would be restless in the presence of treasure, but now his whole body radiated chill. Each breath fogged the air with cold, and a thin frost feathered the nearby coins and gems. The change came from the dragon crystal Smaug had swallowed, a thing of extreme cold. An ordinary creature would freeze to death on contact, yet Smaug, being a dragon, survived. His internal fire was merely suppressed, rendering him unable to breathe flame. Smaug's lineage made the situation all the more portentous. He was descended from Encalagon, the mightiest of the ancient dragons, slain by Arundel, whose falling body crushed Thangorodrim. Legend said Encalagon's wings could blot out the sun, and his fire could rival even the power of the great rings. Smaug, still young, was the last scion of that blood, and already the most promising dragon of the Third Age. If he absorbed the dragon crystal's energy in sleep, accelerating years of growth in a single slumber, he might leap toward the strength of his ancestor. For now, Dewey let him rest. The process of assimilation needed quiet. Dewey left the treasury and walked into the garden. His garden was a riot of strange and wonderful plants. King's grass grew everywhere. Its miraculous healing properties made it a life-saving herb for the people of Hogsmeade below the mountain. Whenever someone fell ill, they climbed up to request a sprig. Dewey never refused, and had tried to transplant the grass down the mountain so villagers could raise it themselves, but the plant was fussy. It required a natural environment rich in ambient magic and the right temperatures, conditions that only Weathertop could provide. The castle itself thrummed with magic. Runes were carved into every brick, and magical beasts, dragons, giant eagles, basilisks, acromantulas, shared the slopes, creating overlapping fields of power. Most importantly, 2 divine trees stood sentinel on the peak, the Holy White Tree and the Mao Long Tree. The Holy White Tree, a 3rd-generation descendant of Ninloth, radiated extraordinary magic. Under their influence, even the pickiest of plants thrived. Alongside King's grass bloomed Eleanor, those tiny golden star flowers that never withered, and the white Evermind, a ring of blooms that shifted through 8 colors like Entwives' petals. Fragrances braided together on every breeze and drifted through the castle, leaving everyone who inhaled them feeling steadier, clearer, almost intoxicated in the best possible way. Arwen tended the garden most days, even fetching water from Galadriel's fountain to keep the big trees and rare specimens healthy. The result was a garden that rivaled Galadriel's own for vibrancy and serenity. Dewey strolled past the beds and toward the Mao Long Tree. It towered above everything except Amansul, 1.5 times taller than the Holy White Tree, its trunk easily 10 meters across, so broad it would take 20 or 30 people to reach around it. A spiral staircase wrapped up the trunk to platforms among the branches, each platform paved in white marble and set with pavilions and small towers. Dewey climbed to the highest level. Golden yellow leaves shimmered in the sun, turning Weathertop into a sacred gilded crown. Even the low clouds took on a warm tint. At the very top, on the largest platform, sat a giant nest. It had once belonged to the King of Eagles, but Thorondor, now far larger than the old king, had expanded it himself until it was vast enough for his bulk. The great eagle lay curled there, one wing frostbitten and temporarily useless. Smaug had helped him up into the nest after the fight. When Dewey appeared, Thorondor gave a weak, affectionate cry and tried to stand, flap his ruined wing. "Enough," Dewey ordered mildly. "You're hurt. Don't move." He reached into his spatial box and drew out a dragon corpse. The creature had been harvested whole and stored. Dewey had plenty of dragon meat to spare. Thorondor's eyes brightened at the sight. He tore into the flesh with his hooked beak and fed with obvious gratitude. Dewey watched him with a fond, almost paternal expression. Of all his companions, Smaug and Thorondor meant the most. Smaug for raw, terrifying power, an asset to Dewey's own strength, and Thorondor because Dewey had taken him in as a nearly dead chick and raised him into a sovereign of the skies. Thorondor's loyalty was absolute. Unlike the others, he wasn't bound with a magic contract because Dewey trusted him utterly. That loyalty had been costly in the Battle of Isengard. Thorondor had seen a false Dewey devoured by a frost dragon and, convinced Dewey was dead, thrown himself at the beast. He'd been reckless. One wing was now frostbitten. Smaug had been the hero of the day, swallowing the dragon crystal and growing stronger for it, and other creatures, Herpo the basilisk, Cerberus, Aslan the griffin, even the lesser dragons, had all distinguished themselves. Thorondor felt he had been mediocre by comparison. He brooded, as only a proud, intelligent creature could, ashamed, afraid he'd become a burden and be set aside. Dewey heard the thread of anxiety in his companion's mind and couldn't help smiling at the theatricality of it all. In Thorondor's inner narrative, he was the ignored middle child, Smaug the brilliant eldest, Herpo the dazzling third, the wolf and griffin the boisterous youngsters, and Thorondor left wishing for recognition. That image amused Dewey, but it also made him think. Giant eagles were, essentially, very large eagles. They had the advantage of size against humans, orcs, and even elves, but against dragons their scale counted for less. Dragons breathed fire, basilisks wielded lethal magic. Thorondor's physicality alone would not suffice for the kinds of opponents Dewey intended to face. Dewey had successfully used transformational magic before, to become firebirds, great bears, and to facilitate animagus evolution into phoenix-like forms, and he wondered if a similar approach could elevate Thorondor. If he could be transformed into a thunderbird, the idea suggested itself. Everything would change. In the magical bestiary, thunderbirds were rare, formidable creatures. On par with phoenixes, they resembled giant eagles, could sense supernatural dangers, summon storms, and unleash lightning. Newt Scamander's story came to mind, how Newt had once rescued a male thunderbird named Frank from traffickers in Egypt and planned to return it to Arizona, then later released it over New York to wash away the traces of a magical catastrophe. If Thorondor could gain thunderbird powers, stormcraft, and lightning, the boost would be immense. The trouble was practical. Dewey knew the thunderbird as a concept, not as a system to be reverse-engineered. He had no understanding of the thunderbird's magic circulation, the internal patterns of essence and flow that would be required to design a stable transformation. Finding such knowledge felt like chasing lightning. "If only I had a specimen, or even a diagram," he muttered. Despite the slim odds, Dewey did not give up. He discussed the idea with Thorondor, who brightened immediately at the thought of transformation. The eagle wanted nothing more than to be made whole and mighty again, to summon wind and rain, to send down lightning, and to rule the sky without second thought. Thorondor's eagerness decided the matter. Dewey filed the project among his future experiments. He planned to consult Gandalf, whose help had been crucial in designing the phoenix-like animagus systems, and to seek Elrond's counsel. It was not urgent, but it belonged on Dewey's list. For now, there were more immediate tasks. Dewey returned to the potion room to finish the elixir of life. He had already simmered the brew over low heat for 24 hours. The liquid had darkened to nearly black. He ground 3 pink pearls to powder in a mortar and added them to the cauldron, stirring clockwise 4 times. These were no ordinary pearls. They had formed from the tears of the Orni, the merfolk of this sea. certain the shipwright had obtained them through his acquaintances among those creatures. The recipe had called for selkie scales at this stage, but these tear pearls were a suitable substitute. Dewey added dragon's blood, intoned the necessary charm, and stirred clockwise 7 times, then let the potion go back to a low simmer for another 24 hours. When the second day passed, he reached into the pot and withdrew the Philosopher's Stone. It showed no change and felt cool to the touch. He set it aside and removed the cauldron from the fire to cool. The liquid inside had brightened to a vivid red. Dewey continued to stir as it cooled to prevent separation, then poured it through a separatory funnel and let it stand for an hour. He drew off the lower layer and returned it to a pure gold cauldron. There he added dragon marrow and reheated, stirring constantly until the mixture reached a boil. He quenched the flame and allowed it to cool. The potion settled into a jewel-red color, rich, deep, and luminous. Dewey studied it for a long moment, then smiled. The elixir of life was complete. Chapter 268, Taking the Elixir of Life. Dewey's heart raced as he stared at the freshly brewed elixir of life. The potion in that pot could add 30 years to a lifespan. Carefully portioning it out, he had enough to fill 3 small vials, each only a single mouthful, but each worth 10 years. He drank the first vial without hesitation. Instantly, his limbs felt lighter, a warm, invigorating current flowing through his bones as if his life thread had been thickened. 10 years, gone. At least, those years were added to his life, and for a decade his body would not age. Overcome with relief, Dewey emptied the remaining 2 vials in quick succession. In an instant, he had extended his life by 30 years. The weight that had sat on his chest for so long lifted. He immediately set about making more of the potion, determined to build a reserve. A month passed like a blink. In his potion room, 3 more pots of elixir of life were completed, 9 small vials in total. Add the 3 he had already taken, and he now possessed enough for 12 doses, 120 years of extra life. For over a century, he would not have to fear the slow creep of age. He wanted to drink them all at once, but elixirs of life had to be taken in measured doses. It was like eating. You couldn't gorge and gain permanent change in a single sitting. He had pushed his limit once already by taking 3 vials in a row, possible only because his physical constitution exceeded that of most wizards. The normal protocol was 1 vial at a time for 10 years each, taken again when each period neared its end. Taken regularly, the doses could, in theory, halt aging indefinitely. Thinking this through, Dewey placed the 9 remaining vials carefully in the potion cabinet and locked it. He would space the doses out. 10 years between each intake would provide a margin of safety. If something went wrong with a future dose, he'd still have a buffer. Relief and a new lightness colored his steps as he left the potion room. For the first time in years, he felt unhurried, no longer pursued by the specter of a short life. He walked the castle corridors and greeted the animated portraits that lined the walls. Over time, Dewey had populated the castle with many enchanted paintings. Himself and Arwen, Smaug the dragon in a pile of gold and in flight, the great eagle Thorondor in his nest and soaring, a kraken with oceans to himself, the basilisk Herpo chasing hapless Acromantula, and portraits of elves, dwarves, residents from Hogsmeade, even orcs and trolls. Some portraits were lively and witty, others were crude fragments of memory and quite silly. The troll painting, 3 trolls yelping as 13 dwarves hacked their ankles and smashed their feet, was a comic favorite. Balin's painting of Bilbo soaking in an iron pot, wide-eyed and innocent, still made Dewey laugh. It was a gift from the Lord of Moria commemorating the Troll Forest incident. Many paintings had been done by elven artists from Rivendell and Lothlorien, or by artists Dewey had hired. He had enchanted all of them with potion work, so they moved and spoke. The castle was rarely still because of them. The dwarven portraits were the worst, loud, raucous, and always celebrating into the night. They woke the quieter elven portraits and caused a steady stream of complaints. In the end, Dewey had to move the dwarves' paintings to less crowded walls. The staff had grown used to the talking paintings and even chatted with them while cleaning. Mayor Luke and Lacey from Hogsmeade and Bree would report their work to Dewey's portrait when he was away, and the painted Dewey would offer precise counsel. Promising to immortalize them in paint had energized the mayors. The rumors of the castle's living portraits drew curious visitors from far and wide. Dewey stopped before his own portrait and touched the tip of his wand to his temple. A silver thread of memory slid into the canvas. The painted Dewey brightened, his eyes sharpening as the new memories were absorbed. He smiled and, in a tone half jesting, half sincere, said, "Congratulations, original me. You've achieved immortality." Dewey allowed himself a small smile but shook his head. "It's only external," he said. "If the Philosopher's Stone fails, or if an ingredient goes bad, everything collapses. That's not true immortality." "True," the portrait agreed immediately. "To be immortal, you must change yourself, from within." "So the plan to evolve my animagus form into a phoenix still stands," Dewey murmured. "Only the phoenix's rebirth power could be a foundation for real immortality." The painted Dewey's expression sharpened. "The heart of the Balrog that was purified in Lothlorien should be nearly ready. When will you proceed?" Dewey sighed. "It's almost purified, but I won't rush. Turning an animagus into a magical creature is conjecture. There are no successful precedents. Any accident would be irreversible. I must be fully prepared." He knew the risks as well as anyone. In the history of their world, no animagus had reliably become a magical beast and returned to human form. Some who attempted such profound changes went wrong. Minor mishaps could leave one monstrous. Worse, magic could unravel explosively. Others who succeeded lost their human minds and gradually became the animal they had taken on. If he attempted transformation, he had to ensure both the process would be safe and that he could revert to human afterward. To tilt chance in his favor, Dewey planned to brew Felix Felicis, the potion of good fortune. If he drank it before attempting the animagus phoenix transformation, he reasoned his odds would be much better. But when he took out Professor Snape's notes and scanned the recipe and ingredient list for Felix Felicis, a frown creased his face. Chapter 269, Fooling Pharmacy. Felix Felicis was, by reputation, one of the most difficult potions to brew. Every step demanded precision. A single mistake could ruin the batch, or worse, cost the brewer their life. The process itself took months, nearly half a year, and even the most accomplished potion masters hesitated to attempt it. Duir had Professor Snape's notes to guide him, but he was no potion master. His skills could be sharpened by study and cleverness, but he lacked the lived craft of a master. That crown of cunning he wore would only carry him so far. Worse, several essential ingredients simply didn't exist in Middle-earth. Snape's list called for 2 pints of mandrake extract, 1 pint of lemon juice, 10 ashwinder eggshells, 7 drops of undiluted acromantula venom, 6 fire salamander eggs, 23 fresh amaranth petals, an inch of unicorn horn, and 1 drop of blood willingly given by a unicorn. Mandrake, lemons, and amaranth he could source. Ashwinder eggshells and fire salamander eggs could be substituted by the local fire snake eggs or salamanders reared on unusual diets. Acromantula venom could be approximated from the great spiders of the region. But unicorn horn, and more importantly, a unicorn's willingly given blood, those were dead ends. There were no unicorns in Middle-earth. What could possibly stand in for them? Duir tried a quick experiment in the castle stables. A flick of his wand painted a plain horse white and gave it a spiraled horn. Superficially, it looked like a unicorn, but the illusion didn't change the animal's essence. The creature was restless and uneasy under the spell, and Duir reversed it with a tired gesture. He reopened Snape's notes, hoping some overlooked remark might save him. Snape had brewed Felix Felicis in secret years before, hoping to use it as an escape hatch for Lily Potter. He'd recorded every step meticulously, having even refined aspects of the process. His notes included not just measurements, but his reasoning for each ingredient. Snape insisted unicorn horn was essential to stabilize the potion and neutralize residual toxicity. A drop of blood willingly given by a unicorn, he argued, raised the potion's magical purity and prevented impurities from producing harmful side effects. Duir could not, by any conjuration he trusted, reproduce those properties. He needed a natural analog in Middle-earth, something that would confer stability and neutralize toxins, and another substance that would purify and elevate the potion's magic. There was only one person he could think to ask for advice: Elrond, the wise lord of Rivendell and the greatest alchemist in their lands. Elrond listened with a quiet, appraising look when Duir explained the problem. After a moment, he spoke. There are few things in Middle-earth that match a unicorn's nature, but two possibilities come to mind. He told Duir of the Arrah cattle of Rhûn, the cattle said to be descended from Orome, the Vala of the Hunt. Their white horns were reputed to confer magical stability and had been used in olden rites to neutralize venom and toxin. Their horns might stand in for unicorn horn, Elrond said. I would not suggest using anything more sacred than an ordinary Arrah horn. Duir's heart lifted. He had seen such beasts before. Rumastamo, the blue wizard, rode an Arrah mount, and in his pouch he produced a curious relic, the Horn of Victory. Elrond took it, and his face changed. This horn is not from a common Arrah, he murmured. It belongs to the closest descended line of Orome's cattle. It is a rare and noble relic, now extinct here, perhaps only present in the blessed realm beyond the sea. Then I shouldn't use it? Duir asked. You should not waste such an artifact on a potion ingredient, Elrond said gently. An ordinary Arrah horn will do the work. The other half of the problem, the purifying drop of blood, gave Elrond pause. There is, he admitted at last, something that might substitute. Not many will have heard of this. The blood of the Light Elves, the kind who walked under the two trees. Their blood carries a purity and longevity that lies beyond mortal magic. In old times, some men sought that secret and were cursed for it. Only willingly given blood from an elf of that kind could be safe to use. Duir felt the weight of the answer. Light elf blood was not only rare, it was sacred and not given lightly. Elrond named two who might qualify, Galadriel and Glorfindel, the latter known in Rivendell as the Lord of the Golden Flower. Duir thought of asking Galadriel. She would almost certainly consent, but she had already done much for him, and she was close kin to Arwen. He chose instead to seek Glorfindel, a proud and luminous elf who kept much to himself among the books of Rivendell. He found Glorfindel in the vast library, hair like a river of light and a calm brightness about him that made the whole chamber seem warmer. The Lord set his book aside and regarded Duir with a steady silvered gaze. I seek a favor, Lord Glorfindel, Duir said without preamble. I want to brew Felix Felicis, but I lack a component Snape insisted on, a drop of blood willingly given by a pure light elf. Will you give it? Glorfindel studied him for a long breath. Then, to Duir's surprise, he smiled. Yes, he said simply. I will give it. Duir was stunned. Before he could find words, Glorfindel laughed softly. I am curious to see what such a potion will be like. When you brew it, bring me a draught. Gratitude flooded Duir. He wanted to offer something in return. He dug in his pouch and placed a small bottle before the elf. This is an elixir of life I brewed, he said. It can restore vitality and prolong life. I have nothing else fitting to offer. Please accept it as thanks. Glorfindel's curious smile widened as he lifted the bottle. The elixir from a philosopher's stone, he said. I sensed an immortal substance when I first examined it. You will not be refused. Then, with a swift, elegant motion, he drew a slender dagger and nicked his fingertip. Duir's hand went up instinctively. One drop is enough. Glorfindel did not halt. Pale, luminous blood welled from the cut in quick, bright beads. One drop fell into the crystal vial, then another. Enough, Duir said again, panic edging his voice. But Glorfindel's hand was steady. He allowed 10 drops to fall before he closed his finger and slid the dagger away. The wound sealed almost at once, leaving no mark. He handed the vial of blood to Duir with a wry half-bow. If you find it insufficient, tell me, he said, and bring me, as promised, a taste of whatever you brew. Duir could barely keep his relief in check. He thanked Glorfindel with all the earnestness he felt and took his leave of Rivendell, planning at once a journey east to find Arrah horns. As he was preparing to go, Arwen stepped forward with a small, carefully wrapped bundle. Duir, she said softly, holding out the black cloth, your invisibility cloak is finished. Duir unwrapped it with hands that trembled more from happiness than fatigue. The cloak was perfect, light as a breath, woven with skills he had admired since his arrival in Rivendell. He bowed to Arwen, then to Glorfindel, and set his face eastward, horn and elf blood secured, and a new cloak over his shoulders. The hardest part of the potion remained, but for the first time since he began, a real path forward lay clear. Chapter 270, Magic Cloak. Dew took the cloth bundle from Arwen's hands and unfolded it. Inside lay a deep black cloak, as dark as the night sky. Light seemed to be swallowed by the fabric, unable to reflect. Across that midnight surface, countless tadpole-shaped runes had been embroidered in mithril thread, like a sky full of tiny silver stars. They formed regular, intricate patterns, runic sigils and magic circles woven into the very cloth. The cloak was spun from the silk of Shelob the acromantula and threaded with mithril. To stabilize and neutralize the spider silk's darker properties, Arwen had even incorporated a braid of her own hair into the weave. It had taken her nearly a year to finish. Under her expert hands, the piece was both magnificent and mysterious. Each star-like rune carried its own strange power, and the whole cloak seemed extraordinary. It was astonishingly light, almost weightless. Dewey held it with a look of joy and gratitude. "Thank you, Arwen. This cloak could not have been made without you." He held it up as if to show it to her, then turned and looked at her face. Nor could it have been woven so quickly. Arwen shook her head gently, her eyes bright as starlight. "No thanks are necessary. I am happy simply to help you." The words warmed him. Dewey pulled her into an embrace, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know when Gandalf will return." He grumbled against her neck. "I can't wait to marry you." Arwen's composure melted into a radiant smile. She laid a hand on his broad back. "I have always belonged to you, Dewey. We have a long life ahead. There's no need to rush." Reluctantly, they parted. Dewey carried the cloak back to Isengard. On the platform at the top of Orthanc, he drew a 7-pointed star array in dragon blood and set the cloak in its center. Although woven, the cloak still needed to be activated, infused with power to charge its invisibility. That required a vast well of magic. Dewey was not short of such things. He produced the Philosopher's Stone, alchemical pinnacle, and then the enormous heart of a frost dragon. The dragon heart was a raw reservoir of magic, unstable, immense. He placed it in the circle. As he activated the array, the heart's magic was drawn out, and after being filtered and refined by the Philosopher's Stone, poured steadily into the cloak. Orthanc amplified the array, drawing in ambient natural magic to augment the flow. One by one, the tadpole runes flared to life, each a pinprick of bright light, little stars awakening. Day after day, the infusion continued. On the 7th day, when the last rune glowed, the cloak was saturated with power. The once dormant runes now formed a complete, circulating magic circuit that would continuously absorb outside magic. The frost dragon's heart, completely spent, crumbled to dust and was blown away. The cloak, fully charged, felt alive. Its runes and threads maintained a self-renewing flow of power. Even if it were damaged, it could repair itself over time. When the light in the runes finally dimmed, Dewey banished the dragon blood sigils with a Scourgify charm and reached for the cloak. It unfurled and hovered as if weightless. One side shone with those countless runes like a starlit sky. The other side was utterly impossible to see. Light passed clean through it, as if the fabric were not there at all. Dewey wasted no time. He donned the cloak with the invisible side outward. Immediately, everything below his head vanished. Looking down, he saw only emptiness. Not only was his body invisible, the cloak also muffled his heartbeat, masked his magical signature, and erased his scent. He set a palantir before him to check. The seeing stone reflected nothing. It could not find him. Relief flooded him. This truly was like the deathly hallow of legend, something that even death itself could not find. A palantir could ignore mountains and walls to reveal a person's image. That it could not pierce the cloak's concealment impressed him. With this cloak, Sauron's sight could no longer detect him. For a fleeting moment, Dewey fantasized, slip into Mordor under the cloak, carry the One Ring to Mount Doom, and end Sauron once and for all. Then he thought of reality. Apart from Tom Bombadil, who could ignore the ring's power, only a hobbit could resist it at all, and even then only partially. Bilbo was retired, and Dewey would never ask him to take another perilous journey. The future Frodo had not yet been born. Finding some other hobbit willing and uncorrupted was nearly impossible. Most hobbits loved their quiet lives and would be corrupted by the ring's influence. Gollum had been once a hobbit and had killed for it. Even Frodo nearly succumbed to the ring at Mount Doom. No one could guarantee resistance, and even brief exposure could doom any plan and lead to the ring's return to Sauron. For now, the ring in Tom Bombadil's custody and shielded by a Fidelius enchantment was the safest course, hence the cautious approach of Gandalf, Elrond, and the others. Dewey sensed that further thought would only cloud his judgment. He turned the cloak so the star-strewn side was outside and let it settle around him. The black fabric, studded with runes, made him look even more mysterious. To his surprise, the cloak did not simply hang. It lifted him into the air, collar and back molding to his body, the hem fanning out like bat wings. He felt light, as if buoyed by a levitation charm, and then the cloak guided him through the sky. Dewey had added this feature himself, inspired by Doctor Strange's cloak of levitation and the engineering principles of a flying broom. The cloak did not drag him like a sail. Instead, it reduced his apparent weight and moved him rapidly and precisely. Its acceleration was astonishing. He could go from a standstill to 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds, matching the speed of a firebolt. His hands stayed free, so he could fight or cast spells while soaring. He grinned like a child with a new toy and took to the skies over Isengard, looping and diving to get the feel of it. Griffin Aslan followed, eager to race, and the two streaked through the air. For something that combined true invisibility with flight and self-repairing enchantment, Dewey decided on a simple name: the Magic Cloak. From then on, he vowed to keep it at hand whenever stealth or swift travel was needed. When he was ready, he activated a portkey bound for the eastern reaches of Rhûn. He intended to visit the blue wizard Romastamo and to obtain the horns of the Aurau cattle on his next errand. Chapter 271. Gather Materials. Welcome. Long time no see, Dewey. On the rolling slopes west of the Sea of Rhûn, Dewey apparated outside the blue wizard Romastamo's wooden cabin. Romastamo sensed him and came out at once, grinning. Mornetar, the other blue, was with him and gave Dewey a warm smile as well. Good day, Romastamo. Mornetar. Sorry for dropping in without warning, Dewey said. Don't be so formal, Dewey. Romastamo waved him off. We don't get many visitors besides the animals. You're very welcome. Especially you. Our savior, really, Mornetar added with a chuckle. They ushered Dewey inside, and Romastamo poured him a steaming bowl of milk from the Aurau cattle. Dewey drank it, and even in his weakened state, felt a faint surge of strength. No wonder the Easterlings prized those cattle so highly. The Aurau cattle were descendants of Aroma's herds, enormous, noble beasts of the eastern Rhûn plains. Their white hides and pale, jade-like horns were legendary, but endless hunting had reduced them to a few hundred. Once, when Gondor's realm reached into Rhûn, Steward Vorondil hunted an Aurau and fashioned its horn into a great war horn that became his family's heirloom, later split by orcs during the War of the Ring when Boromir fell. Without Romastamo's protection, the herd would likely have been extinct long ago. That was why Dewey had come to Romastamo first when he needed Aurau horn. When Dewey explained he needed horns, Romastamo didn't hesitate. Aurau cattle horns? Of course. Romastamo went into a storeroom, rummaged, and produced a horn segment nearly a meter long. This was broken off when Norimal got into a fight with another bull, he said, handing it over. Norimal was his mount, a pure white Aurau bull with luminous, jade-like horns and a majestic presence. Dew felt honored and fortunate to have such a gift. But Romastamo didn't stop there. He also offered a small herd, 30 wild Aurau cattle, mostly cows with calves and a few bulls, grazing in a nearby valley. Dewey packed them into a spatial box, planning to raise them at the foot of Weathertop. He tried to repay Romastamo with a bottle of elixir of life, but Romastamo refused. They're not mine, he said simply. You don't owe me. Dewey accepted the refusal and left, returning to Weathertop by portkey. He went down to the shore of the Black Lake at the mountain's base, a flat, open grassland facing Hogsmeade across the water, and released the herd. The lake itself would keep the cattle from wandering too far and protect them from most predators. At first, they were restless in the unfamiliar place, but the lush pasture calmed them. The adults were immense and imposing, their pale coats dazzling in the sun. Their horns glowed faintly, solemn and powerful. The calves were soft-furred and pink-nosed, almost comically charming. Dewey had other reasons for valuing them besides appearance. Aurau milk boosted strength, and their horns could substitute for unicorn horn in several advanced potions, including Felix Felicis. With this substitute, potions that had once been impossible without unicorn parts could now be produced. He assigned the kraken that lived in the lake to watch over the herd and let them multiply there. Satisfied, Dewey returned to Hogwarts Castle to gather the remaining ingredients. He started in the tower common room where the fireplace burned year-round. Dewey peered into the flames and saw a few fire salamanders, basking and feeding on the fire. He had created them by altering ordinary lizards with Balrog blood and heart fragments. They could not survive away from flame for long, and leaving the fire quickly weakened them. Dewey wasn't especially concerned with them running amok. So long as the fire stayed lit, they were safe. Sifting through the ashes with tongs, he irritated the little salamanders, and they spat sparks at him. He grinned and kept searching until he found 3 tiny eggs buried in the coals. Fire salamander eggs were small and easily overlooked. He removed them and immediately cast a freezing charm to keep them from scorching and dying. Felix Felicis required 6 such eggs, so Dewey moved from fireplace to fireplace, gathering more. Fire salamanders bred rapidly wherever there was flame, so the castle's many hearths yielded what he needed. Next, he visited a specially sealed chamber lined with many fireplaces burning by incendio, its air thick and hot. Ashwinders lived in those fires, creatures he had likewise fashioned from Balrog blood, stronger than fire salamanders and capable of leaving the fire briefly to lay their snake-like eggs in dark corners. Ashwinder eggs were volatile, they radiated intense heat and could spontaneously combust if not cooled. Dewey searched the room's shadows and found over a dozen eggs, glowing like molten iron, and froze them before they could ignite. Neither fire salamanders nor ashwinders demanded much maintenance. As long as the fires kept burning, they supplied him with potion ingredients on their own. From there, he went to the acromantula room. The spiders, forced to weave ceaselessly by Smaug, were squeezed for fresh venom. Smaug, ever the opportunist, still insisted the spiders work for profit, even though Dewey could turn base metals to gold with the Philosopher's Stone. Turning lead into gold is one thing, Smaug liked to say, and making spiders weave for money is another. Dewey indulged the dragon's mercantile whims. The spiders' lives were treated as expendable, and those that died were fed to Basilisk Herpo. After the venom, Dewey gathered the last small items on his list: 2 pints of mandrake extract, a pint of lemon juice, and 23 fresh amaranth petals. With the Ara horn, the eggs, the venom, and these ingredients in hand, he was ready to begin brewing Felix Felicis. Chapter 272, Production of Felixir. Before he could attempt the Phoenix Animagus experiment, Dewey went to Lothlorien. The purification period for the Balrog's heart had ended. Lady Galadriel met him in her garden and handed him the purified heart. The heart was smaller than he remembered, no larger than a bowl, and its outer red crystal was now transparent and clear. Most striking was the core. The Balrog fire had been cleansed of its corruption. The dark, malevolent flame had become a warm, golden-red light that no longer scorched to the touch. Dewey held it in awe. This was no longer a Balrog's heart, but the heart of a Maya. Balrogs had once been Maiar of fire before Morgoth's corruption. Galadriel had spent the past 3 years purifying it with Narya's power. The pollution of darkness had finally been stripped away. What remained was a pure Maya core. The Balrog's essence was deeply corrupted, Galadriel said gently. Some of its original power could not be restored, and a portion has been lost in the process. But what remains is more than sufficient for you to forge the Phoenix Fire. Had it been wholly restored, its potency might have overwhelmed you. Now it is exactly right. Dewey bowed his thanks. If not for you, Lady Galadriel, I could not have done this. Galadriel shook her head. If you truly wish to thank me, then care for Arwen well. Believe me, Lady Galadriel, Arwen is the desire of my heart. With the heart, now truly a Maya heart, in hand, Dewey returned to Weathertop and placed it beside the Philosopher's Stone. He could not begin the Phoenix Animagus transformation until Gandalf had returned and the Felix Felicis was ready. So his next task was to brew the Felix Felicis. Felix Felicis was an extremely difficult potion. Only an experienced potions master could make it reliably. To bridge that gap, Dewey donned the Crown of Wisdom. In the potion room, he set up a pure silver cauldron and began the precise, punishing work. He first added 2 pints of mandrake extract, 1 pint of lemon juice, 10 ashwinder eggshells, and 7 drops of acromantula venom. Each ingredient had to be fully integrated before the next was introduced. Hesitation or haste could ruin the brew, or turn it into a lethal toxin whose fumes could kill silently. The Ashwinder eggshells had to be added one by one, and the acromantula venom had to be dripped in alternation with the shells, drop by drop. The exact number of stirs at each stage depended entirely on feel and experience. That instinct was normally the province of a potions master. The crown of wisdom sharpened Dewey's mind and senses, speeding his calculations and steadying his hands, making the process surprisingly reliable. He heated the mixture over a low flame, stirring continuously until the liquid turned bright orange. Then he added 6 fire salamander eggs and kept the cauldron simmering for 3 days, stirring 4 times clockwise and 3 times counterclockwise each day. When the potion glowed red, he evenly sprinkled in 23 amaranth petals and did not stir, letting them sink and dissolve by themselves. After the petals dissolved, he reduced the heat to a low simmer and performed a strict stirring schedule. 7 times clockwise and once counterclockwise each night at midnight for 25 consecutive days. The entire time the brew could not see a single ray of sunlight. It had to be made in complete darkness, with the stirring done only at midnight. When the 25 days were up, he took the cauldron off the fire and filtered the potion 3 times using a filter woven from elf hair. Unicorn hair would have been the traditional filter, but there are no unicorns in Middle-earth. Dewey had substituted elf hair, plucked rather stealthily from his brothers-in-law. Since Elrond had agreed to his suit for Arwen, Eladon and Elrohir had challenged Dewey frequently. Dewey's enhanced physical fitness and sharpened senses let him hold his own. His legilimency told him their intentions before they acted. He'd used their sparring matches as cover to pluck a few strands of hair. The brothers could do little against his combination of power and perception. They only intensified their own training. Arwen watched their contests with amused resignation. Once filtered, Dewey poured the potion into a pure gold cauldron and stirred it with a gold rod until the liquid turned milky white. From a small crystal vial, he drew a single drop of Glorfindel's blood and added it. Using a pure silver rod, he stirred 7 times counterclockwise, then twice clockwise, until the liquid turned golden yellow. He removed the cauldron from the heat, let it cool, and decanted potion into an opaque amber flask. Next came a cautious substitution, a white horn from an Arrah cattle. Unsure whether its properties matched a unicorn horn, Dewey ground a 1-inch piece into powder and, taking no chances, sprinkled it in slowly while stirring. The crown of wisdom pulsed against his brow as his mind raced to track every subtle change in the liquid. When 2/3 of the horn powder had been added, his intuition, bolstered by the crown, told him to stop. He trusted that feeling and ceased adding more. The golden yellow liquid showed no visible change. That completed the hands-on work. Dewey sealed the amber flask and placed it in a specially prepared room, completely dark by day and at night, with walls that could become transparent to let moonlight fall directly onto the flask. The potion must age in total darkness for 6 months, but receive moonlight. Sunlight would destroy it. The flask had to remain undisturbed the entire time. After 6 months, if droplets formed on the surface of the liquid naturally, the Felix Felicis would be successful. Exhausted from the intensity and precision of the brewing, Dewey removed the crown of wisdom and rested for 3 full days to give his overloaded mind time to recover. The crown had pushed his cognition to the limit. The fatigue was mental rather than physical. For the next 6 months, beyond occasional checks, the potion required little attention, freeing him to resume other work. He planned to continue his transformation experiments, designing a Thunderbird magical circulation system for the giant eagle Thorondor, and there was the matter of his proposal to Rivendell. That required an Elder of Gandalf's standing to formally present his suit, bring betrothal gifts, and, with Elrond's consent, sign the marriage contract. So he was waiting for Gandalf's return. A few days later, Gandalf arrived through the Hogwarts fireplace. "Gandalf, where have you been?" Dewey asked, eager. Gandalf laughed. "Impatient to marry Arwen, are you? Sorry to keep you waiting. Gondor has been busy. Minas Morgul sent forces into the field, and there have been pirates in Haradrim raiding the south." He leaned his staff against the wall and sank onto the sofa. We first retook the western part of Osgiliath, then forced a crossing and drove the Mordor troops from the eastern sector. After that, we sailed downriver to intercept the pirates and the Haradrim. It has been one thing after another. I thought you might be anxious, so I declined the regent's invitation to the victory feast, rode Shadowfax to Lothlorien, left him there, and came straight to you, Gandalf added. Dewey was relieved and urged him to rest. Gandalf chuckled and produced a spatial pouch. On the trip, I encountered a brood of wingless cold dragons bred by Mordor. I slew 3 and a flood swept the rest away. I remembered you might need dragon stock for potions, so I collected the corpses. Dewey opened the pouch to find 3 cold dragon carcasses. He had already accumulated many winged dragons, but he accepted Gandalf's gift with gratitude. Perfect timing, Gandalf. You haven't had dragon meat yet. Let the kitchens prepare some for you. Gandalf's eyes brightened. Splendid. In Osgiliath, King Thengel wouldn't stop boasting about dragon meat. I've been eager to try it. Chapter 273, Silver Engagement Ring. As a lord, Duir naturally had a retinue of dedicated cooks. He could have prepared everything himself with magic, but even he knew that conjuring exquisite meals every day would grow tedious. Instead, he had recruited the finest chefs from Hogsmeade and Bree. With generous pay and the prestige of serving a lord, applicants clamored for the positions, some willing even to live in the castle for nothing. The staff's biggest task, however, was not only feeding Duir. Dragon Smaug, the giant eagle Thorondor, and the 3-headed wolf Cerberus of Isengard all had prodigious appetites, and provisioning them consumed the bulk of the kitchen's labor. So when Butler Edward presented a slab of dragon meat to the cooks, they stared in disbelief. Dragon meat. They were actually being asked to cook it? For a stunned moment, they thought they must be dreaming. After they had finished sampling the dragon meal, Gandalf and Duir sat down to discuss Duir's impending marriage. Gandalf knew the rights and customs of the elves well. He explained that when a man wishes to marry an elf, he must first secure the consent of her parents. A person of standing would be sent to the woman's home to propose. If the family agreed, both houses held a banquet to announce the engagement, and the couple exchanged silver rings as pledges. By elven law, at least a year must pass between engagement and wedding. If either party publicly returned the rings during that term, the engagement could be dissolved and the returned rings would be melted down. Elves were so devoted, though, that broken engagements were rare. At the wedding itself, both families gathered for a feast, and, under the witness of Varda and Manwë, the gods gave their blessings. The couple recovered their engagement rings and then exchanged wedding rings of gold, which the elves traditionally wore on their right index fingers. So, Gandalf said with a chuckle, Duir, you must craft a silver engagement ring yourself. Do you have any ideas? Duir admitted he hadn't given it much thought. Any suggestions? He asked. Gandalf grinned. The engagement ring is a statement of intent and devotion. The wedding ring is simpler. For the silver engagement ring, you can be imaginative. Use your talents to win her favor. After all, there's at least a year to prove your worth. If the ring doesn't please your fiancé, you might face a delayed wedding, and that would be unbearable. Duir smiled. He did not expect Arwen to be difficult, but because this ring was for her, he wanted it to be exceptional. By the next day, he had settled on a design. In his alchemy workshop, he retrieved a thumb-sized sliver of mithril mother, the rare, purer form of mithril, and set it in the mithril furnace. The furnace's heart was a fragment of Balrog crystal and could reach temperatures that could consume the hardest steels, but even that alone could not melt mithril mother. Duir summoned Fiendfire and added it to the furnace. Still, the metal only softened slowly. Seeing this, Gandalf lent his power and channeled Narya, the Ring of Fire, into the hearth. The flames surged. Despite the furnace's insulation, Duir felt the heat wash over him as the mithril mother flowed into molten silver, the blaze burning away impurities until the liquid shimmered nearly pure. When the impurities were mostly gone, Duir lowered the fire and let the metal thicken. He removed it, placed it on the forging table, and began to hammer in a steady, deliberate rhythm with a mithril hammer. Each strike drove a pulse of magic into the metal. Duir fed his own power through the hammer, awakening the metal's memory and coaxing its nature into being. This was the goblin craft of the magical world, metal hammered and enchanted so that it became nearly indestructible, able to absorb strengthening energies and even mend itself if damaged. Gandalf watched in admiration. Duir's technique, while different, rivaled that of elven and dwarven smiths. Gradually, the metal took the form he intended, a ring, bright and faintly luminescent. Before it cooled completely, Duir engraved runes inside the band in Elvish Tengwar, binding enchantments into the inscription. Then, to Gandalf's astonishment, he produced the purified heart of a Balrog. With a sword of living flame, he cleaved from it a small fragment, about the size of a pigeon's egg, a crimson crystal as pure and hot as captured sunset. The Balrog's heart was a crystal of fire elements, dense with terrible energy. Even a speck, mixed with Balrog blood, could birth a creature of flame. Duir worked the fragment with tools and patience. It took him a month to grind and facet the irregular piece into a heart-shaped gem, each face catching and scattering light until it shone with an inner blaze. Within the gem lay a near-invisible spark, a shard of the core flame, an echo of the Balrog's immortality. The gem glowed warmly, drawing surrounding fire essence into itself, like a living ember. Duir set the heart-shaped ruby into the silver band and completed the ring. He slid it onto his finger. The band widened and adjusted itself to his index finger as the ring attuned to its wearer. When he activated it, golden flames erupted, filling the expanded space of the workshop, as though intent on consuming everything within. Duir stood calm amid the inferno. With a gesture, he gathered the flames into a whip, cracked it toward a suit of steel armor in the corner, and watched the whip cut the plate in two. The severed pieces hissed and flowed like molten lava. With another motion, the whip reshaped into a sword, a scepter, an axe, a spear, any weapon he desired. He tested, transformed, and laughed with the delight of a craftsman seeing his creation come alive. Gandalf could not hide his admiration. Duir, this engagement ring is the most extraordinary I have ever seen. The band is forged from Mithril Mother, and the heart is from a Balrog. The wearer is resistant to scorching, can summon and shape fire, and the ring feeds on flames. It is no less than a ring of power. Duir shrugged, pleased rather than surprised. If I'm to win Arwen's hand, it must be worthy of her. There was more to the ring than raw power. Because of the goblin forging, the band did not merely resist fire. When burned, it became clearer and brighter. It could absorb all manners of flame and grow stronger. Rather than melting, it would be renewed and augmented by being forged anew in fire. With the engagement ring finished, they turned to preparations for the journey to Rivendell. Duir insisted on having an old friend at his side as a representative, so he made a detour to the Shire to invite Bilbo. Bilbo was delighted and honored. He readily accepted and followed them through the fireplace to Hogwarts Castle. "Gandalf!" Bilbo exclaimed, rushing to hug the wizard. He was small in stature beside Gandalf, but his smile was huge. "It's good to see you. I'm very well." Gandalf bent to embrace him. "You seem in fine spirits, Bilbo." Bilbo's grin grew sly. "After the treasure from the Lonely Mountain, I could buy the whole of the Shire twice over. There's little risk of my running out of things to spend, and everyone knows of Weathertop and Duir the Black-Robed now. Even the most homebound hobbit has heard of Hogwarts Castle. No one dares tangle with me." He turned to Duir with a conspiratorial wink. "In fact, the Shire recently debated forming diplomatic ties with Weathertop. I voted in favor." Duir raised an eyebrow. "Diplomatic relations?" "It's sensible," Bilbo said. "Bree has grown into a city. The Barrow Downs are no longer haunted, and trade has been brisk. Tobacco, ales, mushrooms, our produce flows into Bree and Hogsmeade, and goods return to the Shire via Buckland hobbits. The Prancing Pony even hires hobbits as waiters now. As trade increases, the Shire's council thought formal ties prudent." Duir nodded. He did not press the matter. It was a local issue that Bree and Hogsmeade's mayors could handle. He was content to leave it to them. Back in the workshop, the three companions gathered. Gandalf's eyes twinkled. "We are about to claim Rivendell's greatest treasure, Lady Evenstar herself," he teased. "So Duir, dress well, go to Rivendell with all due ceremony, obtain Lord Elrond's consent, set the engagement properly, and win the lady's favor." Duir met Gandalf's gaze, ring glinting on his hand, and nodded. The plan was clear. The next step would be to present himself to Elrond. and pledge his intent beneath the stars of Rivendell.